Welcome to Human Sexuality. My name is Carlos Vargas and I will be your instructor through this course. Nice meeting you all. For those of you that don't know me, I'm an instructor that have been in the college for a while. I'm very happy to be here working with you guys. I've been teaching this course for a long time and it's one of my favorites. And I'm looking forward, this is the first time that I will teach it online, so I'm looking forward to this transition. And let's get it going. There's a couple things that I want to address in this video, so let's make the most out of it right away. First thing is, you're in a course that is primarily based off psychology. So if you don't know, psychology is the scientific study of mental processes and behavior. The approach that we'll take on this course will be partially biologically based, but we'll continuously offer thoughts into how mentally it works, so how does sexuality work from a mental standpoint primarily, how does sexuality work from a behavioral standpoint, and we're going to have a conversation about sex, so let's be grown-ups about that. Now, just between you and me, here's one big thing that you should know. In the years that I've taught this course, I've never, in any other course that I've taught, and I've taught a lot of different courses, but I've never had students coming in with such skepticism as they do for this class. Very often I encounter students coming in for this class telling me, what would you have to show me about sexuality? I know everything that there's to know about sexuality. Just because you have sex, it doesn't mean that you know that much. You'd be surprised by how much you can learn about human sexuality in this course. I love to teach this course because very often I clarify some basic questions that some people may have and some quite in-depth questions that other people may have. Hopefully you will enjoy this course. And in the first lecture, I do want to tackle on a couple points, which is going to be the first thing that we'll discuss in this video. So, first thing is, I want to talk about history. Sexuality is affected from a historical standpoint. Things that now we take for granted in regards to values about sexuality had not always been that way. It's affected by what happened in the past. So who we are is a result of what came before us. And there's one specific phrase that I love. You may have heard this before. I cannot remember the author, to be honest with you, but the phrase goes, you can't really know where you're going until you know where you've been. You can't really know where you're going until you know where you've been. In regards to our sexuality today, values, thoughts, behaviors are not fixed, are not always stable. They change with the years. So if we go into the first lecture, typically the talk about historical perspective of sexuality takes us back to prehistoric times, because from the most ancient records that exist in human history, interestingly, it seems like women were worshipped because it was thought that they were the only ones that perpetuated, that kept the species going, the human species going. So women were worshipped, statues were created, paintings were done, and it was typically portraying the body of a woman. However, anthropologists began to track how it changed through the years, and it seems like, years, but we're talking about centuries later, humanity began to notice that there's a connection among sexual intercourse and birth. And then men began to realize that there was something to have to be done in regards to keeping the species. It was not only the sole work of a woman, but it was also the work of men, and that began to change the perspective. Seems like since then, very often in many places still today, it's been a perspective where males are the ones that have the control of sexuality. If you take it to the prehistoric times, one of the first lessons that we get is that women were actually the one that were worshipped first in regards to sexuality because it kept the species going. But as years passed by and humanity began to be more formal, more civilized, unionship and so on, one of the first things that changed and affected sexuality was religion. So if you take it to the times of ancient Hebrewism, law was legislated through religion. So what religion said was right was what law would establish as legal. In those times, keeping a very male-centered approach in society, women were no longer worshipped, but they were entirely dismissed purely as property of men. So a man could, by law, define the amount of sexuality that would to be given. And you may have heard stories about, say, for example, a woman that would be unfaithful would be stoned to death. Or if, say, a man would be sexually abusing someone else's wife, the man would not be convicted by the crime of assaulting someone else, but because of infraction of someone else's property. It's terrible. But that perspective about machismo, about male-oriented society, and you may call sexism, goes back centuries and centuries and centuries. Now, if we jump a little bit on the historical times, in modern times, a lot of what we have today can be taken back to the times of ancient Greece. A lot of what we have now in our society is the work of Greeks, or is this the influence, the strong influence of Greeks. For example, the perspective of education, simply put it like that. The perspective of having one mentor talking to a group of students, and right now how it's evolving that I'm doing it through a camera, but that concept of education, trying to specialize someone in an area, that came from the Greeks. Right now I'm dying because there's no sports. I'm a huge sports fan. The concept of competition, a crowd, a stadium, people cheering for their guys, that was also the work of the Greeks. So the Olympics originally were given in the times of ancient Greece. So there's a lot of things that we have in our society today. Well, the Greeks began to expand the horizons of what was normal in regards to sexuality. The Greeks were the first ones that began to introduce a lot of affinity, a lot of interest and fixation on the body. Right now, a lot of people are obsessed with appearance. I don't know if we can say right now because people are not leaving their homes that much, but you know, there's typically the combination that if you see someone's body as a fit body, you consider that body attractive. The first people that began to portray a fit body as attractive and sexy were the Greeks. They put a lot of emphasis on being muscular, being well-rounded. Those kind of things come from the Greeks. The Greeks began pretty much to open up the concept of prostitution. The Greeks began to also put up the concept of free orientation, so they didn't have the limitations as far as being only male to women relationships, but being male to male. And the Greeks, sadly, also are thought to be somewhat early perpetrators of pedophilia, which is attraction to boys. Past the time of ancient Greece, the big empire that ruled in Europe was the time of the Roman Empire. And the Romans began to be more excessive on their sexual behaviors. The Romans permitted sex with animals. The Romans allowed for huge orgies where you had like multitudes of people having sex together, and the Romans would throw in this flamboyant, excessive parties. The concept of a live show where people would be having some type of sexual act, that's also within the influence of the Romans. You can think of pornography now. So like all those things have their influence in times that went before us. Now, skipping a little bit on the eras, but by the downfall of the Roman Empire, what grew was Christianity. And Christianity thought that all the sexual practices of the Romans were so excessive that they tried to stay away from it entirely. So what Christians began to do was to associate sexuality with sin, because they were trying to, create their space for everything that the Romans were doing. So Christianity began to associate sex with sin. And that has such a strong effect that when Christianity was especially influential through all of Europe, in England, the time of Victorianism is very much known by the Queen at the time, Queen Victoria. They began to be very repressive in anything that had to do with sexuality. There's some pictures they uploaded on the slides, so you can just Google them. Victorian era, and women had to wear those long dresses. Men, gentlemen had to wear also their suits, their white gloves, It's kind of like showing this perfection. And anything that had to do with sex that was supposed to be pleasurable was denied because it was a very repressive society. And I'm telling you all this because Victorianism was such a strong influence not only in Europe but also in America. So the influence of Christianity was seen in society through Victorianism, which eventually caught up to the United States. So in the United States, it was not unusual to have a very repressive thoughts about sexuality. If sex were to be given as normal, it had to be within the context of a marriage. And you often saw couples getting married very, very young at 18, 19 because, a lot of different factors, but let's be honest, one of the factors were they wanted to have sex and they couldn't have sex without marriage. Say, for example, today, people are marrying older. One of the big reasons why people are marrying older because there's a cutoff between having to be married and having sex. People have been becoming a little bit more flexible in that. So it ain't a big deal as it was before. Last thing, the sexual revolution. So in the 60s, there were a couple of things going in society, specifically now in the United States. In the 60s, there was the threat of a nuclear war that could kill people in a minute. There was the introduction of a birth control pill, and that didn't exist before. There was opening of mass media, and there were not really many sexually transmitted infections that would affect the younger population that were just spreading out free love. So you think of the younger generation, the hippies, and they were saying, man, give out the free love. There's no guarantee that we're going to be alive tomorrow, so enjoy life today. The thing is, the hippies began to spread out love and spread out love. Let's spread out love. And of course, spreading out love, they began to spread other things. So sexually transmitted infections became a thing. In the 80s, HIV came to the public. And it was a big scare in society because now having sexual intercourse potentially could lead to a virus that could kill you. So in the early 90s, there was a little bit of a shift, and that takes us to our modern times because in the 90s they began the introduction of sexual education with the purpose of, if you were to at least be aware of what is sexuality, what is in your body, what is in your system, what is a normal behavior, what is a normal thought, you would be a little bit more educated and would know how to take a better decision than if you just go with the impulse. The fact that we have a class today in this topic specifically, and it's even giving you college credit, is because of that influence that we had in the past. There's different things going on right now with society in regards to sexuality. And of course, perhaps the biggest one is right now the fighting for rights for people of different orientations or different genders, or so on. So, first thing that you want to know here is don't think of sexuality as being just stuck, stable, and being always in the same state. No. It's shaped by the past. What happened in the past is affecting what is going on right now. The other thing is, culture has a lot to do with it. The culture, the environment where you grew up has a lot to do in regards to your sexuality. What you may consider normal may not be normal for the family that lives 2 blocks down the road. What in your family is considered normal may not be normal for a family living in a different country. So, be very aware of this. Be very aware of this. Through this course, we will talk a lot about sexuality from different perspectives, and we'll focus a lot on patterns. Patterns. This is what most commonly happens. This is what most commonly people think. This is what most commonly people do. But it doesn't mean that it fits for everyone. As you watch this, at least I want you to have an idea for what is the most common pattern in sexuality. And based off that information, knowing then how does it apply to you, how it is affecting, how does it affect other people, and so on and so on. Ethnocentrism refers to a person or a state of thought in which you perceive everything only from your point of view. So you maintain this tunnel vision. And what you think is normal, you think that is normal for everybody. Ethnocentrism is going to be a big barrier in this course. I want you guys to break off potentially any ethnocentric thoughts that you may have and have an open mind. Have an open mind. What we see here you may agree with entirely right away. What you see here you may not agree with it at all. But be aware, if you find something normal, it doesn't mean that is normal for everybody. And if you agree with something that you see in the slides, it may not be true for everyone else seeing it in this class. Open mind. Let's have fun in this course. It's going to be a good course. Okay? Well done.